Ahead and get the perfect. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on boosting local budgets, leveraging sales tax and lesser known revenue streams. We are hosting this in partnership with our partners at HDL Companies. I am Melissa Keene. I'm the Director of Enterprise Programs and Special Projects at ILG, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. So a quick overview of what we'll cover today. Just going to do a quick welcome and some introductions, and then we'll hear presentations from two of our partners at HDL Companies, and then the city manager for the city of Suisun City to provide that local perspective as well. And then we will have time for audience Q&A after all of the presentations, and then we'll wrap up and adjourn by 1 o'clock. Just a quick housekeeping note, as you've jumped in, you probably are aware that you're muted. You will be muted for the duration of today's webinar, just given the size of the audience that we're expecting, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So you should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to ask questions at any point throughout today's webinar. We'll be responding to anything logistical or technical, and then if the substantive about the presentations, we will pull those and ask them at the end during that Q&A portion that I just mentioned. And then as you just noticed also when you jumped in, we are recording today's webinar, and we will distribute the recording along with all of the materials within the next few days as well. So before we jump into the presentations, I just want to share a little bit about ILG in case you aren't super familiar with us. So we are a statewide nonprofit that's affiliated with the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. So we work with our affiliates and all of you at local agencies to provide practical and easy to use resources so that you all can implement policies on the ground and do the really tough work that our cities, counties, and special districts are responsible for. We do this in a number of ways. We provide a lot of education and training like today's webinar, but also longer format training and conference sessions, things of that nature. We also provide technical assistance and capacity building services for local agencies, as well as we have a host of online resources that are available to you all. And we focus on 4 main pillars or program areas: leadership and governance, which is some of the baseline work that you all have to do, the governance, the ethics requirements, how to work together as a team, work with your elected officials, etc. We have a program focused on civic education and workforce to help create a pipeline into public service, get folks into public service as a career path, recruitment and retention challenges, things like that. We also have a program focused specifically on public engagement, so helping you all be more strategic and proactive in your public engagement efforts. So we do a lot of training and resources in that space. And then lastly, sustainable and resilient communities, where we help local agencies navigate housing and land use issues, climate action, connected funding, and we run an awards program for cities, counties, and special districts that are doing amazing things in that space and implementing best practices and reducing energy consumption and things like that. So if you aren't super familiar with us, definitely go to the website. We have a lot of free resources available to you all, and happy to answer questions offline about anything that we do. And with that, I want to introduce our presenters in a little bit more detail, and then they will provide introductions with their backgrounds as they jump in. But joined today by Bobby Young from HDL Companies, Connor Duckworth, also with HDL, and Brett Pribla with the City of Suisun City. So I believe I'm going to kick it over to Connor to get us started this morning.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Yeah, so just a brief synopsis for those of you that aren't familiar with HDL. We've been around for over 40 years. We do anything local tax, governance, whether it's cities, counties, some special districts as well. We are 100% employee owned and have over 900 agencies throughout the U.S. And we keep growing. I think we're in about 17 states or something right now. So it's that number keeps growing too. We've recovered over $4 billion in revenue for local governments, and you can feel free to ask Bobby or myself whichever questions that you might have after the presentation as well, and we'll have our information up there. They can email to reach out and contact us. I will turn over to Bobby Young, who is our sales tax guru, and he can get going with the sales tax.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, I appreciate that. First time on the Guru. I'll have to kind of hang that one on the wall. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. Looking at as part of the description of the webinar, leveraging sales tax and other lesser known. You kind of, I think for a lot of us, we think about kind of the two big main revenue streams at local agencies, both sales tax and property tax, right? Property tax tends to be a little bit more structured or a little bit more consistent, especially given local home prices. Sales tax, as we know, so dynamic and ebbs and flows with the economy. So it's why we end up kind of focusing on it or wanting to communicate about it quite a bit more frequently than property taxes. And then Connor and both Brett will talk a little bit more about lesser known revenue streams. So I'll lead us off with sales tax. What you see on the screen here is fourth quarter sales results. We get data here at HDL every quarter from CDTFA, kind of compile it all. We maintain about 99% of the statewide sales tax data. Gives us a great view of what happened. It's a little bit retroactive, right? What happened long ago, but then we turn around and look at the forecast and what we think is going to happen. Later in the slides, I'll have a little bit more for you on that front. But what happened in the fourth quarter? You see right down at the very bottom, we were down 1.2% statewide. As I start to talk through some of what happened during the fourth quarter, the value of information is the other piece of what makes this communication so vital for you at your local agency. If you're at a city and really kind of think about what makes up your local sales tax, right? Well, I'll talk about what's going on statewide, but you can really listen. If you're heavy on autos, kind of want to cue in to hear what's going on statewide on autos, because it's probably going to trickle back down to yourself. Or if you're maybe on one of the main thoroughfares throughout the state and you got a lot of gas stations and diesel providers, you might be wanting to listen, hey, what's going on with fuel and service stations? This is really going to help you take what we're communicating about today and apply it back at the local level. And that's the leveraging on sales tax. It's the leveraging of information, being able to really use, rather than sometimes it can feel like we're drinking out of a fire hose when it comes to economic news, especially the day-to-day that we see and read about now, what's going on in Wall Street, what's going on in Washington. When you kind of are able to synthesize that down and take what you need and be able to apply it, I think that's the highest value that we could play. So really quickly, autos and building construction, we're on 2 years of quarter over quarter declines now out of these two categories. It would say, up until the fourth quarter of 24, been mainly due to interest rates and the rise of interest rates from the Fed Treasury back on us consumers. Yes, late in 2024, we started to see the Fed Treasury inch down a little bit, but not enough to really impact returns. I'll talk about interest rates on a couple of slides coming up as well. As you kind of scroll down, you'll see the double-digit decrease out of fuel and service stations, most notably because of crude oil prices. They go hand in hand for in many respects for us here in California. But compared to a year ago, crude oil is way down. Our local gas prices were down. And I would tell you that actually maybe helped our bottom line overall. Even though it hurt receipts, as you see on the screen here, for us as consumers, it did allow during the holiday shopping period to be able to spend maybe a little bit more than we otherwise would have. You can see general consumer goods as a category was down 2% and 2.4%. And yes, people spent a little bit less than a year ago, but I can almost guarantee you that if gas prices were higher, we would have seen general consumer goods down much lower during this such vital period. The fourth quarter overall is the single highest generating quarter for sales tax statewide. It's when we all, as consumers, get out and spend a little bit. So yeah, it's so vital. Having lower gas prices probably wasn't the worst thing in the world. Granted, if you're that agency that's got a lot of truck stops or gas stations and you're a little bit more dependent on it, we want to be able to listen and really kind of think through what crude oil is going to be doing for you locally versus kind of other things statewide. Restaurants still doing really, really well, and pools were up. That's a point that I'll talk about again a little bit later. We did see shoppers get out and spend money. It's just a matter of where from. Do I have control over the slides, or maybe Melissa may?
Yeah,
I'll
I
let
have
you
them.
know. Okay, wonderful. I'll let you know when to transition. So what does this look like? You heard me mention for a couple of the categories, we had seen 2 years of declines. The top graph here, quarter over quarter, kind of the ebbs and flows. The peaks are the fourth quarter, as I may mention, the highest grossing quarter overall. And yes, we've been on this steady kind of trend down. But then I'd quickly point out down below the statewide trend on a longer scale based on calendar year, where we've come from. To the left there is the period just after the pandemic, or not the pandemic, the Great Recession, sorry, 2012. We started a nice upward trend all the way into until the pandemic in 2020, saw that drop. Feds inspired and infused our economy with trillions of dollars. We as consumers went out and spent it all. You can see the following 2 years of 21, 22, dynamic growth and a rebound from that period. The last 2 years, 23 and 24, yes, we've regressed, but I would then also say on this scale here, we've regressed back to the trend. Not so much, kind of in this recession, although yes, in today's world, we're definitely talking about the R word. But over the last 2 years, we've just regressed back to the trend, and it's been a cooling off for our sales tax and our consumer economy here in California. Next slide, please. All right. As I was mentioning before, kind of where shoppers were during this fourth quarter and where we've been as consumers the last couple of years. Here's a quick little synopsis out of a report that we provide to all of our clients, where we're tracking brick and mortar stores versus online retailers. So regardless of when we talk about online, regardless of whether it's in-state fulfillment or coming from out of state, it's all included in our line here. Obviously, right in the middle, you can see the COVID impacts. And then we also had AB 147, or California's implementation of out-of-state online retailers, that dramatically increased the amount of revenue we were getting from online, brought these two lines close together. I've told this story many times. Before that point, I said these two lines will never cross. I almost had to eat my words. Thankfully enough, we all got back into shopping, especially at big box retailers, Costco, Sam's Club, Target, Walmart, the like. A lot of that volume shopping most certainly helps brick and mortar get back above online. I don't think it's something that can be replicated. But when you then look at that blue line, the lighter blue line, and you stretch out to 2024, you can see a little bit more of an uptick compared to 23, especially when compared to brick and mortar. For us, we look at that and say, well, consumers are definitely shopping, they're spending, right? And that's a lot of what we heard before the last maybe month or so with our economy, is that no, the economy is fine. We're not, consumers are still out and about shopping, all good. But where from is really what our takeaway was. More from online vendors versus brick and mortar. So it's just more of a change of habits, or as you see in the title to this slide, looking for value. Most of us would agree that we'd be able to do comparative shopping and find lesser priced goods online versus trying to go from store to store and find them. So it's reflected in the data. It's nice to see some growth overall. That way, kind of supporting the economy as it sits. Next slide, please. So when our team sits around the table, as we always do when we get new data, we start kind of throwing everything against the wall and having big discussions. It's usually about a 6 or 7 hour meeting that we end up having. You could see some of the topics, most notably that we talked about this quarter. To the left, interest rates. We know it's so vital for us as consumers, or whether we're going to be spending and how much we're going to be spending. Credit availability, equity within home values. And I'd say then, if again, kind of thinking about property tax, we know that property values have not pulled back in many jurisdictions, many local areas. Property values have continued to increase. Well, that's available home equity. That's also going to turn out to be, part of a positive gain on your property tax revenues from Prop 13 and kind of keeping those going. But that available home equity, if consumers are able to tap into it, eventually with lower interest rates, it could spur the economy. But right now, it's probably being more holding down and being more of a drag on our results. Right in the middle, all the talk the last, we'd say month, but more dramatically the last like 2 weeks with tariffs and the results or the possibility of inflation. I think we all kind of acknowledge that that's more of a likelihood versus a possibility. What's that going to do for consumer spending? I got a slide coming up to specifically talk through some of the tariffs. But it's in the middle of our chart here because it's an unknown. It's very uncertain of exactly how that's going to affect us as consumers, and then sales tax as an inevitable result. And then you see on to the right here as a green box is gas prices. Lower gas prices, meaning folks are able to dine out and travel a little bit more. We see that as a positive for the economy. So again, these were just some major topics that we spoke about once we got data. So let's take a quick dive into two big topics: interest rates, most notably. As you see on the screen down below, were the interest rate hikes that the Fed Treasury put into place to cool off inflation because of the post-pandemic spurring that we all spur in our economy, or spending splurge that we all went on as consumers. So cooled off. Then late 2024, we saw them start to inch interest rates down a little bit. As I talked about before, it's something that maybe I'm over focused on interest rates and what interest rates will do as a result of a lot of the discussions coming up here with tariffs and our economy. But it is vital for us as consumers when we think about autos, when we think about building construction, credit card debt, and kind of leveraging any type of financing. It's going to trickle into every major industry group that we see in sales tax. So it's probably why I focus on it the most. But listening for Chairman Powell and the communications out of the committee, what they're looking at, and maybe what they're going to start to change as far as parameters and benchmarks that they look at. While it may be labor market and inflation and those types of things, it may also, and they've hinted at this, building in forecasting forward what they think the economy needs, not necessarily what it's been as far as historical trends. So very interesting to watch. Go ahead and go to the next slide as well, because we see how the Fed board has changed its trajectory. The lowest line there you see was back in September, and where they thought they were going to do what they would do with Fed rates, or just the number of reductions that we might end up seeing throughout 2025 and into 26. Cooled that off in December, and now in March, kind of right in line with where they were back in December. Minimal reductions expected to see here in 2025. I don't believe it's a great thing for our economy. How we get there is going to be the next 6 months that we've got to traverse through. But I think reduction of interest rates is probably going to be a better thing sooner rather than later for our California economy. Tariffs, the big unknown, the big everything, all headlines, all communication around tariffs right now. This is just kind of an example of starting to define what tariffs are. What are we talking about? Just on this slide, some major Chinese retailers. You see down at the bottom, eBay, Etsy, Amazon. How would the number of goods that they send over, what's the direct exposure to possible tariffs? Not an overwhelming percentage, right? It's not 100% of goods. So kind of start to put a little bit of context around that. What's going to be applicable when it comes to tariffs? Go ahead and go to the next slide. Because obviously it's not just on Chinese, but and not just on general consumer goods. You could see here, it's a bigger unknown with regards to alcoholic beverages, automobiles, blanket and reciprocal tariffs, which is kind of a great unknown or a gray area, computer chips, lumber, steel, those that we've heard about, who it's going to be applicable against and what's the rate. So it's obviously varied, right? And as I put up here, what, where, and when is the when now is becoming even a bigger unknown, right? Just 2 days ago, we end up with, oh, we'll put a 90-day hold, and all of a sudden now markets change and projections could change as well. I say all of this not to amplify the uncertainty, but it is more to communicate specifically, okay, us at the local level, what should we be listening for, right? So if we go to the next slide, kind of more of the bullet points. When you get the question, how will tariffs affect my agency? And this could be for local cities, counties, or special districts as well, right? Because you're going to be purchasing, you might have those capital projects and the goods needed or the materials needed for those. You kind of want to, you might be getting those questions as well. Well, specifically, okay, what are we talking about when it comes to what proposed tariffs will actually be enacted and at what time, right? And this is meant to help you guys communicate out to who's ever asking the questions, your community, your board, your council. It's unknown. So we can't know because we don't know exactly what and when, right? Future congressional bills as it goes through Congress and talking about not just tariffs, but also will there be tax law changes that incentivize and support us as residents here in the United States to say, okay, hey, we're going to lower taxes in order to pay for higher price goods. If that ends up happening, it could end up telling a different story on sales tax impacts. In that, okay, if prices go up, but we, the consumers, still buy the same amount, we would expect to see more sales tax revenue versus less. I know sometimes we just think, oh, tariff's bad, it'll pull our revenue down. And then also, yes, how will local California consumers respond? We've seen a lot of that discretionary income and discretionary spending decrease. That's the autos and building that I was talking about the last 2 years. We've seen a lot of that stripped away. Now we're into demand spending, the amount that it takes for each one of us to live day to day. So kind of, for those goods, those demand goods, prices could go up, but the likelihood is we're still going to end up spending. We're going to need those goods, so we're going to buy, and sales tax will be supported, not necessarily negatively impacted. All right. Next couple of slides here, just going a little bit deeper. Myself and my team, just a couple of weeks ago, we did our own webinar on these results. We took a whole hour, did a deep dive. That webinar is available on our website. Feel free to go there if you'd like more, but this is a little taste of what we got into. You can see specifically on the autos front, when we're talking about tariffs and its impacts, there's the kind of, familiar with what we've seen recently, and then a little bit unfamiliar. And you see on the left there, yes, expecting higher prices, lower inventory, some bargaining leverage, dealers selling only highly optioned vehicles. That was kind of like COVID. If inventory gets restricted, that could be the case. Kind of unlike what we saw, which is more the right side here. We saw a lot of federal payments and distributions of cash to us as residents during COVID. That gave everybody a lot of money to go ahead and spend. We're not going to probably see that so directly like we did during COVID. So that's going to be a little different. And then as you go down, economic uncertainty and trade uncertainty, also kind of interest rates. You throw that in. Back during the COVID period, we have really, really low interest rates. Now we're up higher, and so we're starting from a different position. But just some different considerations there for autos. Again, not always directly tariff related, but it's okay. What might we see coming out of that? The next slide is simply on general consumer
Hey,
goods.
Bobby,
Yeah.
before you move on, we do have a clarifying question. Can you explain what a
Sure.
highly optioned vehicle is?
So more high end, higher priced vehicle. Think top of the line, which back during COVID, a lot of people had available money, so they bought. now we start getting into, and this is a little bit of that discretionary distinction of it's not like what we had during COVID, where people have, kind of already curtailed buying top of the line vehicles. And we've seen that especially on high-end Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, Ferrari and Lamborghinis and the like a lot of that has already been curtailed. So we're in a little different position. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on the next slide, most tangible for a lot of us is general consumer goods. And, what are the possible impacts on electronics, home furnishing, personal care products, not core products, but pet supplies and the like. Really here on general consumer goods, like I said, the value of information. Think about your local businesses, what's inside your city limits, what's already producing sales tax for you. And if you don't have a lot of general consumer goods stores, should you be concerned about tariffs on sales tax locally? Probably not on tariffs on general consumer goods, tariffs on autos. If you're on that side, maybe. Again, fuel is going to be another consideration, but really kind of think about who you have locally. But at the kind of right in the middle, they're not expecting a significant negative impact, and that goes back to discretionary spending versus demand spending. I think the discretionary has been stripped away. We've seen categories like jewelry stores slow down, right? Not as much available as far as income goes. Now we're into demand spending, and on that demand side, if prices go up, but we still need those goods, we're going to pay more for them, thereby still generate positive results when it comes to general consumer goods. And shoppers looking for deals. As I talked about early, we've seen shoppers shift online, and that definitely changes how local sales tax gets allocated. If you go to the next slide here, you'll see just how we piece it apart. On the left, brick and mortar stores, like we all know, right? Those that are within our jurisdictions, what they generate comes to you locally. Online, when it's out of state, dumps into the countywide use tax pool, right? So when goods are shipped from out of state or overseas, comes into the countywide use tax pool, every jurisdiction gets a piece of the pool versus, and that's all calculated based on how much is generated locally. The third one are for goods that were already in California at the time you and I, the consumer, bought them. The likelihood is those sales tax dollars are going to stay in the jurisdiction where the goods resided at the time of purchase. And that's most notably in what we consider fulfillment centers. So those online sales do kind of break apart where the sales tax dollars go to. More information is available on our webinars that we've done. If you want to go in deeper, I won't take too much of our time, but just a reminder that it does separate out. Last couple of slides here.
We have one more clarifying question, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
as it relates to sales tax kind of in general. Where would you account for sales tax for brick and mortar stores that are purchased online? So for example, you order online and go pick up at Safeway or at Target or something of that nature.
Sure.
In these slides and just in general, how would you account for that type of tax?
Yeah, going back over, let's see, probably since the emergence of, major online retailers, Amazon especially, here in California. So this takes us back into 2015, 2016. And it was this, local merchants can't compete with online retailers as far as price and everything else. So there was a lot of emphasis on shop local, right? The shop local campaigns, trying to get the word out, keep our revenue local. Now in today's world, it's almost, it's very difficult to have a campaign like that because of availability. A lot of stores aren't even stocking shelves to the variety that we, the consumer, would like, right? So it's only available online. The next phase or the next way to really kind of focus that is buy online, but pick up local. And what we're hoping for there is a greater possibility that, like, let's say you shop with, let's call it Target, shop online, you say you're going to go pick up in the store. The hope there is that Target takes those goods right off the shelf in the store. And when they do that, even though you made the transaction online, technically speaking, the sales tax dollars should get allocated to the store because that's where the merchandise was. And that would then leave it for us over here on the left side, brick and mortar retailers, right? So you get to maximize your dollars. Obviously, we can't always control where the inventory comes from. You can buy online from Target, pick up in the store, but if that inventory, if it takes like a couple of days to get to the store, figure it's coming from somewhere else, and then it's going to wind up there on the right side, either coming from out of state or it was at a Target fulfillment center locally before it got shipped out to the stores for you to pick up. So hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. The next two slides is talking about the forecast. Where are we going? What do we think? Right at the very top here in the red boxes, you can see 8 periods. I talked a lot about autos and building at the front end of this two-year decline, 8 quarters worth, but we've seen it statewide, right? Steady, small declines. It almost just felt like a little bit of a reemergence of the word stagnation, or just kind of just trickling along here, not seeing any dynamic growth. For where we are right now and what's coming is first quarter 25 is the next data set we're looking at. That'll be January, February, March timeframe, the period we just got out of as consumers. We're not expecting to see a whole bunch there. You can see fairly flat through the end of the current fiscal year, 24-25. So it's going to leave us with about a 1% decline statewide. Then as we turn the fiscal year and you start looking at third quarter 25 and on, the hope, even though right now over these next 6 months, we're going to have this back and forth with Wall Street, with Washington, with the economy. This is what our feeling is right now, that we're going to see a little bit of growth. It's not nearly close to the normal historical growth, which I think if you go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit longer time frame here. So 1% right in the middle, I got it circled there. And if you glance then to the left, you'll see, especially the 2 years of double-digit gains post-pandemic, the stagnation and just kind of inching along here, these most recent 2 years. If you look though to the right, you'll see, yes, eventually we get back something closer to 3.5%, which is closer to our normal historical growth. But with everything considered today, it's just minimal as we look forward into 25, 26, hoping for some growth there before, okay, now we'll get into more stable growth starting in 26, 27. So then the big takeaways, or a recap of the takeaways: interest rates, I'm really keeping a close look on them. The moment that those start to tick down, I think it's going to inspire spending. So it's why I believe it's so vital for us here in California. Tariff impacts and consumer response, we're still kind of waiting to see. It's not necessarily going to be a bad thing when we think about sales tax. For us as consumers, it's not going to be a good thing. We know that. But shifting our hat, putting on city operations from a sales tax perspective, it may end up providing us a little bit of growth out of sales tax. Stock market changes, the ebbs and the flows. My gosh, people are, I'm sure, going crazy on Wall Street, especially over the last week-ish. But we really think about it. If you're in a community where your demographic is a little bit more high-end consumers, high income, or high household income, really kind of keep an eye on what's going on with the stock market, because your local consumers, if when the stock market's doing good, you probably see them out shopping and buying things at a much faster pace versus now over the last week. You might hear some retailers go, yeah, it's been slow, right? Stock market's down. So think about your demographic, businesses, but also who your residents are and your household trends or your household structures there. Has demand spending reached its bottom? That's what I keep asking myself, waiting to see data. 1Q hopefully starts to tell us that, yep, we're at the bottom right now with that demand spending only going to go up from here. And as I may mention, the next 6 months is going to be pivotal with regards to our economy. It stinks that it's right here at the beginning of this next fiscal year, as you guys are all building budgets and trying to plan for what's to come. A lot of volatility, a lot of question marks for sure, but our hope is that we end up seeing some data and we can stay on top of it for all of our clients. The last slide is simply just as a reminder, earlier today, CDTFA did a webinar with Cal Cities to talk about AB 2854 and the reporting requirements directly related to tax sharing agreements. I just put this here as a reminder. Feel free to go back to Cal City's website to look for a copy. If you weren't able to jump on that webinar, feel free to go back to their website to really get this important information, because there is a due date of April 30th. There's some wiggle room with regards to compliance before CDTFA starts applying penalties or enforcing some penalties, but just kind of get as much information as you can. I just want to remind everybody of this fact. And I think that's it for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Bobby. As a reminder, you guys are dropping in a lot of questions, but if you have others, continue to put those in the Q&A box. As you can tell, we'll answer kind of logistical questions as well as clarifying questions as we go, and then we'll hold the rest till the Q&A section. Before we jump into the second half of the presentation, we do have a quick poll for you. I'm going to ask my colleague to get this launched, if you can. Perfect. Okay. So if you can share with us where your highest revenue tax base comes from. Looks like about half of you have answered, so we'll give this just a few more seconds here. It looks like most folks have answered, so if you want to go ahead and share those results. Looks like most folks are saying property tax, followed by closely by sales tax, and then handful at TOT and utility user tax.
Well, that is right on par with our next discussion here. So right now we're going to be talking about what's called the other taxes. So Bobby mentioned a lot about sales tax and where that's at right now. We're not going to really dive in deep on property tax today, but we're going to hit over the next bit on sort of the other taxes, and we'll discuss a little bit more on that. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Just know we usually do this in about an hour, so I'll be talking quickly. And Brett is going to be chiming in with some real life stories along with some of his work in the various cities that he's worked for and currently in right now. So just to preface everything, I do want to talk about regulatory versus non-regulatory. You can just go to the next slide. And then, of course, the types of regulatory or the types of revenue sources. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. What's the difference between regulatory and non-regulatory? The various revenue sources that you can get outside of sales tax and property tax. Some collecting challenges that local governments have, and then ways to increase revenue and accountability. So real quick, what does regulatory and non-regulatory mean? Essentially, regulatory is the powers that are given by a council or a governing body, if you're a county board of supervisors. Non-regulatory is one that does not relate to it or that duty of power. All right, so regulatory, just wanted to throw a number out there. It really gets confusing in the business license sort of world. A regulatory power is only about 10 to 15% of California cities that actually have that. Most are tax-based, which is non-regulatory. A regulatory is can be defined in the code, but it's often not listed. It can also only be increased by a city council, board of supervisors, etc. It is a cost recovery, meaning that whatever is, we see a regulatory on that front being a business registration or a business permit. Those are regulatory. A cost study, how much it takes to put into that, is usually reciprocal on what it costs to pay for those. So you're going to see low end flat rate sort of costs, whether you're a home-based business or whether you're a corporation. It's a registration. All the city is doing is collecting the information on that business. It's not for tax purposes. It's mainly associated with community development, public works, types departments. So if you're looking at a home occupation permit, a building permit, an inspection permit, those are regulatory in nature, not a tax. And it can be challenged in court. It has more teeth, is what we call it, for forcible action. And then on the non-regulatory side, once again, if we're looking about business licensing, it is about 85 to 90% are non-regulatory. How do you know? Well, the very first sentence of your code for your business license chapter, if you have one, is going to tell you, it's going to say this is for revenue collection purposes only, or this is for regulatory collection purposes only. So it's going to tell you right there in that first sentence what it is. As mentioned, it does get muddy watered, right? So most cities think that building, planning, fire, has that authority to hold back a business license. In most cases, they are not allowed. You're graying the water and it's really becoming murky, and you open yourself up to a lot more litigation, right? So you want to create a separate duty, separate powers for regulatory versus tax. The tax is only imposed in the municipal code, and it can only be raised or reduced by voters. You can reduce it through city council action. That's okay as a short-term sort of temporary block, but it can only be raised. It's a Prop 218 sort of item. So I saw a couple questions were in Prop 218. Yes, anything tax, business license, cannabis, TOT, UUT that has to do with the tax is going to be done through Prop 218, which then has to go to vote.
And then Connor,
yeah.
do you want to explain maybe the difference between some of these Prop 218s where many may be used to water, where it's a protest vote, which is a very different thing than a lot of these Prop 218s, which is actually a majority weighted vote of positive that you need to get. And the two are like, if we pass water rates increases kind of easy, even if we get protests, because you can never hit that limit. But this is a very different reality. You want to give a little bit on that, maybe?
Yeah. That's a great point too. So on your utility rates, those go to council for the most part, right? So you don't have to worry about it. Yes, there's a public forum, you can comment, and you can have multiple hearings on those types of items. However, it ultimately lies with city council to make the decision of the increase. Now they're often very minimal as well. So that's the leverage that you have. Where your tax as a whole, business license, TOT, cannabis, UUT, sales tax, property tax, any parcel tax are going to go to vote. And that's just because you have that transparency. And back in the 90s is when Prop 218 came into play. Most of them, I'm going to say that with an asterisk because they are a 50% plus one. There are in certain cases, a lot of times in property tax too, where it's a 2/3 type majority. But yeah, that's a good point, Brett, on that. And as mentioned, it does get confused on the other sort of permits and things like that. The state likes to pass things down, especially on the business license side. We're seeing it a lot more on TOT, STR too, but they often don't understand the ability on how most taxes are a tax, or how most licenses or tax collection are a tax base or a license base rather than the regulatory side. So they often pass down regulatory measures to the license side, which can confuse a lot of people. And it becomes difficult on that process. But just note that that's something that, whoever your provider is for business licensing, hopefully can have the ability to differentiate and assist. All right, so taxes that we know about the sales tax, right? Bobby mentioned that earlier. We have a state base of 6%, county local tax that will grow from there. depending on where you're at, what county you're in, what city you're in, you might have adopted additional taxes, whether it's for your sales and use tax or local wide, or it could be transportation along the way. Those are on the sales tax side of things. Property tax, same thing, can be done at the county level, the local level. Park and lieu or Mello-Roos, those are also additional sort of taxes that we add to it based on your zones and where you're at, how old your house is, et cetera. And we're not going to get too deep into those today. But as we saw in the poll, most agencies have the bulk of their revenue in those two taxes. So those are often dictated, as Bobby mentioned too, by the economy and by the market, right? So where is the economy at? Has it taken a hit? Is there inflation? Are there lower wages? Are automation, being a factor in it? So those are all questions that we see with the varying abilities with those taxes, whether they're higher or lower. Is your agency built out, right? So this is a big property tax thing. Are you a suburban agency that really has no additional room for growth without tearing down additional properties? So that is something to take into consideration. Are you more of a bedroom community but still built out? Property tax, younger versus older. Younger meaning that there's often going to be a lot of turnover. There's going to be a lot of new development, perhaps. Your sales tax is a Prop 13. That's going to be sort of changing. You might get a higher end sales or a higher end property tax. I'm sorry, but on the older communities, maybe your house is in a trust or your property's been a trust. It's been passed down generation after generation, and it really hasn't hit the Prop 13 sort of levels yet. So you might see a lot less of that revamping of the ability with the property tax when a new changeover has occurred. Also, coastal versus inland. Coastal is typically going to be a little bit more built out than some of your inland. We are seeing a lot more inland build out, especially in the Inland Empire, in Orange County, and even in LA County, San Bernardino, Riverside County, especially San Diego counties, Imperial. In Northern California, the inland type communities aren't necessarily built out as much as Southern California quite yet, but that's where we're going to see more of those sales and property tax as they become more built out. All right, so I'm gonna start going a little bit more on the other taxes right now. So we talked about those fees, right? So fees are regulatory, meaning that you have to have cost recovery. You're probably most familiar with them and how they operate. And this has to happen with a fee study, and city council typically will, or your board of supervisors will pass these fees. So we'll see them often in application, renewal fees for business license, permitting, community development, home occupation, CUPs, temporary use, public works encroachment permits, sidewalk permits, things like that. You'll also see them in more regulatory aspects of a business license, such as a sidewalk vendor, tobacco, massage, short-term rental, alarm. These are permit and regulatory sides, so they still might collect a tax, but most of the time they're going to be on a regulatory fee, meaning that they have more power in your community development departments, in your police power departments type of authorities to have those teeth that we talk about to enforce them.
And Connor,
Yeah, go ahead.
on this one, sorry to just like the biggest key I will say here from the practical perspective is in my career of doing this in various agencies, it's been both county and cities. It has been where I've seen the most revenue leakage, believe it or not. Whereas I think as cities, we don't, well, at least what I have seen throughout is we don't do these big 5-year overhauls, usually with consultants to really dig on the level and depth of the fee increases that we might be able to create. A lot of times we've just done like what we think are just COLA increases on these fees over time. And the industry, especially the last 4 or 5 years, the cost of doing business, both in our salaries and everything else related to it, has gone up so exponentially that I think creating a little bit more of a gut check on it internally, at least on an annual basis, to really dive in and really having, whether it's 3 or 5 years, a firm and do an RFP and get a firm to come in and do a wholesale review of A, do you have the right fees? And B, do you have leakage or gaps that you could adjust, think about events planning fees or technology fees connected to your, building permits and things like that. A lot of cities don't have that. And they are ways that I have found in my career to fund certain aspects of technology really on the user outward in the community back to us. So it has helped fund for me a lot of my land use software and things like that because we built that very directly into a technology part of a building permit fee, but you got to be really intentional about that. And so I would say it's worth the time, effort, and money to really focus on this year to year, and then every 3 to 5 years with a strategic review with a consultant to make sure your leakage isn't in here. Because depending on the size of your agency, I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars of annual revenue increase because we started to focus on this in a more meaningful way.
That's a great point too, and it also brings up a good point to have a fee study done periodically. If you're not doing one every couple years, I mean, things have changed, right? If you haven't done one pre-COVID, the cost of doing business, the cost of not only your FTEs, but everything else that is, as Brett mentioned, consolidated in those fees has gone up. So it is important to have a fee study to recoup those costs and the efforts that the city or counties do put into those regulatory side. Another point is landlord registration. It is a big thing in California, at least. We are seeing a lot of cities, even more suburban cities, taking a look at their land use, who is renting out properties long term, not just short term. And the variety of vendors that do administration along with HDL out there for the landlord use. A lot of cities where we talk about vacant parcels, that'll be one of our other slides. We'll touch on that and why it's important to know how many landlords are in your city. Is it predominant? I've spoken to some cities that, hey, we're at 60% of our age or of our parcels are rented out. So is that a big factor? And that can also determine other factors of taxes, whether it's sales tax, property tax, or other sort of taxes along the way of that community bill. Citations or revenue sources, fire inspection fees, they're often tied to a business license. You have to be really careful with doing that. We don't recommend that they are tied to it, and that's because one is regulatory versus one is that tax-based power. So if you can separate it out, the better. But just know that you can't hold up one for the other. You can't hold up a business license if it's tax-based for the fire permit. So that's why it's best to separate those out. You can collect them at the same time. That's totally fine. Just don't associate them with the same bill because you're going to come into some legal issues that you might be holding one up that's not allowed to be held up for the regulatory power or vice versa. Utility billing, as Brett mentioned, those are often, while some of them are going to be taxes, a lot of them are fees. You might have a set trash fee, you might have a processing fee, an ambulance fee, things of those natures that you might attach to your utility bill that we all get every day.
And on that real quick, if I could just, as you all do this is going to be sort of tangential, but I think it's related. As you look at things, even like your garbage contracts that we all have to have in your 10-year usually cycles that you do that. What we are negotiating now is we have an internal illegal dumping crew that goes around. It's 2 full-time staff members and literally picks up all the illegal dumping daily. And you can't even imagine how it's more than I ever would have thought. But what we've done is build that into the rate of our garbage collection fee to get back that money into the general fund to be able to support that ongoing, right? It becomes a part of that rate structure in talking with them because we're essentially augmenting a service that they otherwise would do, right? And so again, that creativity of like how you also go about where you put these buckets. I think to Connor's point, you have to understand your community, right? Like what's the makeup and then how you best can, create revenue sources that aren't going to create, I think, this really high sensitivity in the community about being overtaxed or overburdened, but also be able to connect any of those increases with like the increase in service demand and value that it provides. Like and this goes to the marketing side we can talk about, which is how you communicate that, how you storytell that. It's very important, but I think being able to be creative, like I said in the garbage contract example, to bring back some of that money with services you're already doing. I think again, those are ways that you can add to your revenue without creating a lot of stir in the community.
If we can skip a couple, great, the next one. All right, so I did mention, about business licensing and what percentage of revenues. They're not going to be the highest amount. We know sales tax and property tax is going to be the majority of cities, their highest two revenue sources. But these are the other taxes, right? So everything else in between. So business licensing or can be a good chunk of revenue if your tax is good, right? So how do you know if your tax is good? Well, most of them are going to be into three sort of buckets. You have a flat tax, which is, let's say, $200 for any business, whether you're a home-based business or you're a big box retailer. There's an employee-based tax, which is how many employees that you have. And then there is a gross receipts type business. Now, there's other things and other factors like square footage and and the scalability and so forth. But those are, for the most part, the three best were the three most common taxes. At HDL, we typically will give our opinion that gross receipts is your best business license tax. Now, most of you will have tax codes that are very old and antiquated, right? So if you look at your tax code, odds are it's going to be 1970, 1980, if not further out. And that is probably going to indicate you have a flat tax or an employee-based tax. Those taxes are not fair or equitable, meaning that your residents that live in the city, work in the city, have their home-based business are often paying less or more tax than their big box retailer counterparts are. And why? If it's a flat tax, they're all paying the same amount. So they're definitely paying a lot more per capita. If you're employee-based, now what's happened over the years from 1970 are we don't have employees doing a whole lot of things anymore. We have automation, we have technology. You go to Costco, you go to McDonald's, you go to Taco Bell, they have an app, or they want you to buy at a kiosk, right? So you walk in, you have maybe one person working the counter, where in the 1970s, you might have had 3 or 4. They want you to order at the kiosk, and then they deliver you your meal that way. Everybody has an app for everything these days. They want you to push to the app online, so it's less humans that they have to take your order from. So employee base is a very regressive tax, especially now. It's only going to get worse as technology develops. So gross receipts, as inflation occurs, as your receipts go up, businesses, the same business might have accumulated back in the 70s, $10,000 a month. That was a great, or $10,000 a year. That was a great amount of revenue. Now it's 10 million, but that same business has inflated just as the same time as the gross receipts have. So that to us is the most one-to-one. Now, a lot of cities still have an antiquated gross receipts tax. It might have been done in the 70s and things have changed. Your economy has changed. The way your city is built and developed has changed as well. And I'll get to Brett to talk a little bit more about that. And then regulatory fees, right? They're still attached. We know there's a CAS fee on there for the state. The state passed it down, as mentioned. The state doesn't really understand the difference between the regulatory and the tax-based side of things. So you are going to capture that, and it is mandated to collect it. However, just know that there is a little bit of a difference in there. So I'll turn it over to Brett to talk a little bit more about business license taxes and what.
Yeah, so I've had a great success in 3 different cities now doing this, and it's been great because part of what I'll say in my role as city manager is you want to develop, in my opinion, partnerships that can last, not just the city that you're in, but if you move on to another opportunity that you can bring with you in a very quick and easy way to help spur up positive change in other organizations. And I've seen that with the business license side, from the city of Napa, the city of Benicia, city of Clayton, and now even in Suisun City, where we've done it for a couple of reasons. One, the more you think about how you do it, we talked about less employees, right? I think when you partner with a firm like HDL to do that, essentially I'm getting the service without having the staff. And I can augment that staff to move them to things that aren't getting done. And I always tell people those things aren't really a staff cut, but they're a preventative need to hire more staff later. That's what these type of partnerships do. And in Benicia is the biggest example where I saw the latency of an archaic business tax that they're still walking through now trying to fix because it just was such complex from the 70s and the mess that it was. We were artificially capping ourselves. So think about this. The cap was so low that like what I'll consider is a well done small business was paying the same amount of business tax as Valero. because we put a cap on it that's in Benicia. And can you imagine, and that was decades of doing this. So that again, when you're not feeding, when you're not reviewing, it's much like the master fee stuff, when you're not having intentional processes around evaluating this, you are really having a lot of revenue leakage. And so in Benicia, we had them do a full discovery program and everything. And what we realized out of it is we had about 2,500 registered businesses, home and brick and mortar. We had 2,700 unregistered or delinquent businesses. I literally had more that we didn't know about because no one had managed the program, more businesses that were either delinquent or just unlicensed in our city, both from a brick and mortar and a home, at home or online business perspective. So when we actually went through and out of that 2,700, obviously some had closed. So, you know, you're not getting all of those on the roll, but we have received hundreds of thousands of dollars in back business license taxes, because we also did an amnesty program where if they came into the fold once they were notified they were delinquent out of this program, they could not pay the interest and only have to pay the back taxes to get them back in the fold. So that hundreds of thousands in one-time money then also turned into ongoing registrations because now they're registered the right way and they're known, and then we kind of stay on them with HDL to actually pay that. So we saw actually hundreds of thousands of dollars of increase on, at that point was about a $50 million general fund. So that's people, right? At that point, I'm either augmenting increases that are happening or I'm adding staff that I otherwise wouldn't because of these kind of revenue fines that aren't, yeah, it's not the property and sales tax tops, but I will tell you, I think you can make a lot of money on the fringes from these other taxes, business license. I'll go into the vacant parcel tax a little later on the value of something like that. TOT, utility user tax, and how you look at that, especially as I think the state is looking at other areas like Netflix and things like that where there may be opportunities. I think being on the forefront of understanding that opportunity and how you can weave that into your tax strategy. And that's the one thing I think my overarching goal today would be to tell everybody is we do strategic plans on a lot of stuff in government. What I have not really seen done well is a strategic taxing plan. Because there's probably a connotation around it and people are scared to talk about it. But I'll give credit to city manager of Benicia, Mario Giuliani, did a great job over the last 4 years of actually showing a literal roadmap to the community of the various taxes they need to do to stay afloat in the services that they would maintain or grow if they were to pass it, and then what could be cut if they didn't. But it was a taxing strategy and it was a roadmap, and it was very impressive to me because it was transparent to the community. It let everyone know what they're voting for today, what they need to vote for tomorrow, what services they would keep or increase from it, and what would happen if they don't pass, basically. And it was all out there. It wasn't like tax to tax. And some of it involved a transfer tax, some of it involved sales tax, some of it involved landscape and lighting taxes. But it was a clear roadmap. And I will say, whether it's business licenses or anything else, having a strategic roadmap is imperative, I think, to having a good tax strategy over whether that's a 2, 4, 6, or 8-year period you're looking at it for elections. I would say that's paramount. But business licenses for sure was an area where, again, I think if you don't have the staff to do it, don't be afraid to go out and hire a firm, HDL or others, because what I have seen in all the agencies is the cost of administration, and especially on the discovery side, is I'm actually making money by having someone else do it because they can put the time, effort, and they have the resources. So don't be afraid of that. I think going out, having that conversation, talk to your peers that have done it. I think there's a lot of benefit, and business licenses, much like fees, I think are 2 areas of leakage that you can gain revenue as a city without creating too much disturbance, we'll call it, in the greater population.
Forward. TOT, so as Brett mentioned, you know, TOT is an easy tax to sort of pass off to the external group, the non-residents that come into the city. It's probably the easiest tax to pass. I did see a measure where I don't think it passed, but there's other strings attached in Orange County last year. But for the most part, they always pass. But you have to be careful, you know, like what is the peak demand that you can really hit that TOT in your city based on the resources that you have. If you're a tourist city, of course, you know, that's probably one of your highest revenue streams. If you're not, then it's one of the other taxes. It's really based on your city makeup. You coastal, do you have something that brings people in, like City of Anaheim, has Disneyland, you know, do you have a convention center? Do you have things like that where where you can really, boost that revenue. It's a tax on visitors. It's not going to fix your budget shortfall. It's the easiest tax to predict. If all things stay the same, and you want to add 1.5%, 2% to your TOT, you're going to know what that is going to bring in based on your current sort of revenues that you're seeing. So it's pretty easy to determine what that can bring in. But yeah, you're not going to fix a budget shortfall based on that.
But the one thing I will add here is if you do not have the staff and you have a good amount of hotels or motels, like I did in the city of Napa when I was finance director, have a firm audit them. Because I will tell you how they apply that, much like cannabis in my experience as well. It can get interesting depending on the hotel. And some of it may be intentional, some of it may be CFO tricks they're trying to do. But we have seen, again, revenue benefits when we brought in a firm, we used HDL in this case to audit them because then they also know you're paying attention. And hard to do when you have like 30 or 40, like I did in Napa, maybe easier to do when you have 2 or 3. But I will tell you from my perspective, we're probably not even staffed well in cities to audit them. Let a firm do it. It's a good cost benefit for you all. And again, it puts them on notice that you're paying attention, which makes them be a little bit more focused in how they're applying things from my experience in doing it.
Exactly. And what we did with Brett in Napa was, we have ongoing audits. So they're every couple of years they get audited, they stay within the statute, and they're still able to, to satisfy those requirements. Some cities, they could find $1,000, other cities $100,000. It really just depends on the hotel. There's really no discriminatory action, whether it's a chain versus mom and pop. Each one's different, each city's different, but as you mentioned, it's a good thing to do if you haven't done it in a while. And that's why we do that ongoing audit. So someone's looking over their shoulder to keep them on tabs, and you get your money quicker because they don't have to pay penalties and interest and sit on the money for months at a time. We all know what short-term rentals are. I'm not going to get into it today due to time. We know it's complicated. We at HDL are actually working with Cal Cities, the League of Cities, on a bill that is going to give more visibility for short-term rentals in cities. But feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and we can chat on that. We'll go on to the next slide. So there's other taxes, right? Just the various sources on there. If you can keep going. UUT, so as Brett mentioned, that's the source. Not everybody has it. Pretty much it's in between about a half to 2/3 of agencies in California have it. We haven't seen many cities adopt a new one lately, but not to say that people haven't been looking, because we have been speaking to a couple of cities that are looking to add a UUT. It's typically a tax that's going to be on electrical, water, gas, and communications. The majority of it and all the different providers are on communications. We know who does electricity. We know who does water and gas in your city. Usually it's just 1 or 2 providers. The communications, besides being your cable and your telecommunications, are often smaller providers too. So anybody that has a plan outside of the big boys that are in the industry, all are taxed if your city has it. So it can range from less than $1 to 6 figures that come in annually. It really depends the size of the city and how many people are doing certain things. We have a service that we help cities with, and once again, we can talk about it later if you're interested. But franchise fees are another big thing that you want to have audited. It's in conjunction with our UUT service that we provide, where you can audit those big players in the system. We have connections at each of those places or companies that can do the audit, and you might not have done it in a while, and that's a way where you keep them honest and still recoup the funds that are owed to you as your local jurisdiction. All right, cannabis, it's a big thing in California now. We've all heard about it. A lot of us have a cannabis measure that's in the city. Those are just a couple. That first bullet point: retail, cultivation, manufacturing, micro business, delivery. There are others that are in there too of what types of cannabis taxes that we have. We all deal with the dilemma in your city: is it legally, allowed versus morally? What is your community based out of? Do we have that revenue? How much revenue are you going to collect versus the regulation that you're going to put into it? As we talked about, right? The cannabis tax is revenue. The regulating the cannabis business is going to be your regulatory side, two totally different pieces that you need to understand are separate, just like business license. It's mainly going to be a cash-based type business, and then revenue trends, right? So pre-COVID, if you were looking to have cannabis, great. It was a really good way of making revenue. Now we've seen a downturn in the cannabis just because inflation has occurred and people are using that money. Eggs are $10, a dozen right now. Do you want to buy a dozen eggs or do you want to buy some cannabis? So that discretionary spending we've seen a downtick, as Bobby has mentioned previously. So it's also affected the cannabis market. You've seen less revenues in cannabis, but that were occurring in the 2019 to 2021 sort of build, but not to say it can take an uptick again. Just if you haven't had cannabis legalized in your city, it's probably not worth it right now at this time to have something due to the saturation and the money that you'll see as that rate of return. But down the road, we can all make that decision later.
Well, and I think, but I talk about the strategic taxing plan. So we have cannabis and it's big. In Suisun City, cannabis is about 3.5% to 4% of my total revenue. So and then we have one cannabis dispensary that does that, believe it or not. We have a 7% excise tax, and we have both a district and a sales tax built in, so that helps at all. But I will say, yeah, I agree. We had a saturation analysis done, and that's a good thing to do if you already have one, to see if you want to add. But also, to your point, keeping it in that taxing strategy, because at some point it's going to be federally legalized down the road. And that, I think, is the trigger potentially from our perspective locally, where this thing gets even bigger. And you want to be somewhat aware of what you'd have to do to get it if you don't have it already, because you don't want that to happen and not be ready to take advantage of it. And I think that's what you saw in a lot of us when it first happened. Those of us that jumped in were able to get at least dispensaries set up where it can be advantageous to us. I had this in Benicia too. It was over $300,000 a year there on a $50 million budget. So a body again. But that's because we were ready to go. And so I think being ready to go is important, and that doesn't take a lot of effort. There's a lot of copy and paste you can do, and HDL is a good company that understands this well. And I think getting to that point and then just being ready when that window opens again.
All right, we have a little bit of time to talk about some other things. So business improvement districts, a lot of cities have them right now. They're an additional tax levied on a business, usually a downtown area, a tourist district, such as a T-bid, which is leveled on TOT or levied on TOT. They're a great way for the economy to grow. Wine districts are becoming really popular. We've been working on a number of cities and counties that have wine districts in California. So if you have wine in your region, something to think about, or just reach out and we can talk more about what other areas have done on that. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so I'm gonna turn it over to Brett to talk a little bit about challenging or some challenges facing communities, and then in about 5 minutes or so, we're gonna do a Q&A session.
Yep. Yeah, I'll be quick. So again, I think it's staffing. I think we all know we don't have the staff to do this. And so that's where I say outsource with your partners. If your cities are in close proximity, potentially even look at some level of regional benefit to combine some of these processes. Obviously, you'll have your individual taxes, but the process itself, see if you can feed off each other. Again, I will say, I think that it is the opportunity of where we can see revenue, again, without creating so much crazy in our communities, is in all these other taxes. So for example, we are looking at a vacant parcel tax discussion internally here in Suisun right now. And the reason is not to try to get the community to pass potentially in a year or so a vacant parcel tax, because we think the money we collect on it is going to be advantageous. That is where you're actually using a taxing strategy to initiate larger economic benefit by people actually moving on the development of the vacant land. So when you look at taxes, I also think a challenge that we have is that we always think, what revenue is this going to bring, in a very linear way. In the case of a vacant parcel tax, I would argue that the tax is actually meant to spur up the other side of the revenue coin on property tax and sales tax, but you're using the vacant parcel tax to kind of create disincentive for people to land bank in your community. And I think I see that a lot in especially older communities. We are a post redevelopment community in California, which means essentially a lot of developers got land for a lot of cheap back in the early 2000s, and they've just been waiting for that like perfect moment because they paid next to nothing for it. And for us, how do we spur them to do it? This is a way we're thinking of creating a high enough tax to basically force their hand in many cases. And so I just say the challenge is it's not always a direct ROI on the amount of money today. It's like, what is the pin action off of some of the tax as well that you can see? And I think that's important. Also, when you look at things like business improvement districts, because I had a great one in Napa that you can imagine did really well. We have one in Sassoon that doesn't do well because we've not developed the community yet. They kind of jumped the horse here and put the cart in front of it years ago when they did this because they did not have a established enough downtown area of thriving businesses to then layer on this BID. And so it really doesn't do anything for us except get a tax that allows them to do very minimal things and creates frustration for new business owners in that area. Really be mindful about the maturity of the areas you're looking to put these districts in, that the value add, like in Napa, it was amazing. And even in Benicia, they do things like all of the trees get lit at night every night. That's paid for by the business district. It creates a different atmosphere. Wi-Fi and music is paid for throughout downtown, and Napa paid for by the business district. They power wash every third day, paid for by the business district. Those are the benefits to me of those business districts. But again, that's not a direct revenue to the city, but that is almost like augmenting things you otherwise would do from an economic development standpoint from your general fund or related funds from the city. And that's the value add. So again, it's not always linear right back into our general funds. It may be tangential, but still have the same quantitative benefit for you as you look at, again, this taxing strategy. And so I think the last thing I'll leave you with is, and reiterate again, a taxing strategic plan, I think, is the best thing to start with if you don't have that. To me, that's step one out of all this. And then you will see from your analysis of your kind of strengths and weaknesses and opportunities throughout your taxing strategy in the various areas, all of that will come out. And now you can get a game plan with your executive team and your councils moving forward on what that looks like to help kind of soften some of the revenue struggles I think most of us are having here in the coming, 1 to 2 to 3 years to come. I think we talked about this a lot already through a lot of my examples on the strategies. Again, I'll go back to, it's got to be intentional. It can't be something that's passive. That's where I like this strategic taxing plan. Again, I think that's important. Once you get this plan, I think it's also easy as the organization shifts over. I mean, in our industry, we do have a lot of transition sometimes in higher positions. And on the council, if you get everyone agreeing to this 6-year taxation or 8-year taxation plan, doesn't mean you can't change it along the journey. But as these changes happen at executive or council levels, you kind of still have a roadmap to go through, much like a strategic plan that you would do with your council, which then creates less volatility. And again, from a messaging with the community, which I think is most important, you can be consistent along that as these other variables change along the way. And I will say that communication piece, when you're talking about any taxation, is most important. Find ways to directly communicate with your residents. I use a product called Rept, which is a video-based product, Q&A with the community. It has huge engagement. Find different ways to do it. The typical newsletter way that I know most of us have in our cities and counties. Yeah, okay, it's very stagnant though. I think you have to think more TikTok, small video, timing to get your message across, especially it's hard with taxation because it's complex. But you got to synthesize those thoughts and needs down to that short-term approach to really get the electorate to understand why and the what, and then be supportive of you when those votes go out to do it. So that would be my recommendation on the comms plan as well to help kind of move it forward. You can go to the next slide. So, I talked about vacant parcel taxes. I think when you look at your agency and organization, just be mindful that you don't have that revenue leakage in what seems like small areas. Some of you may have sports teams or big event halls. It's like, are you getting anything from those tickets? Because it's sure as heck causing you public safety and other issues around those areas that you need to handle. Is your taxing strategy really, or fee strategy, pulling in enough money there that is realistic? And if not, especially when we talk about fees, your councils need and your boards need to be aware of what they are maybe indirectly subsidizing. I think many times that's also a lack of awareness on the council's piece, is that we are not providing them the clarity in the subsidy that they're doing for the user that should be paying things. And that's important too, because that has helped me get higher fees and higher taxes to go out to the public, because the council really was like, we need to tell the story that we don't want to subsidize X, Y, and Z. And that's important too. And that goes back to that storytelling, that communication, and don't be afraid to put it out there. Your councils may make different decisions, and that's why they're sitting up on the dais, but putting forward that information to me has been super helpful. And again, another strategy that I was used to help kind of get you better taxation and revenue down the line.
Great. Well, I know that we have a number of questions. Hopefully
Yeah.
we've answered some of them already.
think
But
you
Melissa, I'll
have.
throw it back to you.
But I want to ask a couple or dig into a couple of things that I've heard you start to talk about. So I'd actually love to start kind of where Brett ended there, and Connor, Bobby, get your thoughts on this too. So we know a number of these taxes either have to go through the 218 process or even have to go to votes of council, and that could be unpopular with your community. So any additional thoughts in terms of that messaging for communities that are really hesitant to adopt an additional tax?
Yeah, we have a number of sort of techniques that we do. I mean, we did about 36 tax studies in the last election, and about a third of them or so went to vote. They all passed. But I mean, each city is different. You know, your residents or each county is different. You know what is the need. As Brett mentioned, often don't have multiple taxes on the same ballot. That's not a way for any of them to pass. But you want to have the message out, right? Create that fair and equitable environment for everybody on the business license side of things. On, do you want to add a specific goal with it? Maybe, to help gain additional police, public safety, fire, etc. With certain things, beautify parks. It's whatever message the city's trying to come across. And there's a number of techniques that, that we can have with cities that we help with.
So grounding it in the benefits that they'll see or the need that this is filling, instead of just talking about how it's going to impact their pocketbook.
Correct.
That's
I would
where we've
also-
seen, oh, go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say, speak in plain English. And I mean, like,
Yep.
things need to be equated to what they buy. So we talk about things in Starbucks cups in the way we've tried to do things, and it's been successful. We got a sales tax passed at 73% recently in November. And it's because we dumbed it down is the wrong word, but we really made it relatable. Like, what is this really going to increase? Well, it's 2 Starbucks drinks a month. And people are like, oh, who gives a shit, right? Like, pardon my French, but like that's the reality. If you tell them it goes up $15 a month, they're going to be like, oh my God, I'm not paying for that tax. Like, you got to relate to what I refer to as the Joe Six-pack model. You got to bring it down to that level, because then you're really talking to the community in a way that they understand it. And to me, that is paramount. No matter what tax you're trying to get passed, you got to bring it down to that level. Sorry, Bobby, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you hit it on the head there, is really the communication and the direct benefit back to the residents of what, a tax is going to do and how it's going to benefit them. I think that's, for the successful tax measures that we've seen, the, community, the city, the council, everybody who was promoting for the tax measure really did a great job of framing it such where it's directly related to the benefit. And I think once you make it, tangential in that way for taxpayers, they're a little bit more okay with it. Nobody likes it, but they're okay with it.
Perfect. We've talked a little bit about the diversity of California already, and every city, every county, every district is going to be different. But we've got a couple of questions that came in around, what about our more agricultural or rural communities that maybe don't have a huge sales tax base or a huge property tax base? Any thoughts for them on how they can leverage some of the taxes we've been talking about today?
From a sales tax perspective, it's tough. Kind of hand up. It is difficult because the retailers aren't there. You may not have the same population. When I was speaking earlier about a high household income area, a lot of the agricultural Central Valley type jurisdictions, it's not a very high household income, right? And so it is more the day-to-day spending, and it is difficult then to especially on the sales tax side, come right back in and say, oh, this is how you would increase it. Tax measures tend to be the next best thing for local jurisdictions. And then comes back to that point we just made, which is, okay, yeah, you're gonna have to tax locals more, but here's how they're gonna benefit, right?
I think too, I think it's along that lines of try to figure out the need of that area. So if the agricultural need is, I'm gonna make it up now, you have a lot of unirrigated ag land, and if you had irrigated ag land, it would drive up the value throughout that more rural region. Is there a way for them to tax themselves, almost like a PBID, but not in that vein, but something like that? Where you're creating that district, almost like what an EFID, not to get complicated, but what there's certain things you can do. I think about what that group could tax themselves on that the city or county could then come in and help augment the need that they have in that example, irrigation, to make the value of the area then go up. So you're, again, not directly maybe getting a benefit from the initial revenue, but if you irrigate it and then they're higher producers and maybe you can look for property tax values going up in that way, there could be kind of a road to get there. I think you got to be creative in how you're thinking about it. And I think getting with firms, you know, whether it's HDL or somebody else that can really walk you through what all that creativity could be is worth the time and value to go through that exercise to try to figure out in those more difficult rural areas how we can make this work for everybody.
Think outside of the box a little bit. And specific to what your community needs. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. We have a question around tools. So Brett, maybe you can start and talk about what Suisun City uses, but what tools do you use or would you recommend jurisdictions use to help manage taxes and fees, especially as we're thinking about going into budgeting season right now?
Yeah, so I think if you get with a partner, you know, their dashboards are always great. I have found most of the partners we'll partner with, whether it's HDL or somebody else, that you have that information readily to understand kind of where your tax base is, what information, who's doing well. We get this, you know, sales tax updates. I think, again, having someone dedicated to do that, that's informed, whether that's your economic development specialist or manager, whether it's your finance team or a combination thereof, I think it's more about the eyeballs on the data. I think the data from your various partners comes in their dashboards and tools. Typically, when we get a master fee study, they'll create an entire template of how we would look at things. So if we want to play around with what increases look like, we kind of have those tools. I think request that of the partners that you're going to work with. I think don't try to always reinvent the wheel. Get these partners, they have the technology to do it. Figure out a way to get that from them as part of your agreements to really be able to assess it. And I will say, and I'm a big proponent and pushing hard in my organization, the use of AI to help you understand it without you having to dig in as much, right? And so we are overlaying a lot of AI in various parts of Suisun City, and we're only a $30 million general fund, 30,000 person population, but we can get it relatively cheap. And what it does is it tells the people that need to know the information faster, so they can help assess what's going on and try to troubleshoot. And that to me is how you get that out is going to be through, in my opinion, the use of whatever tool. You figure out a way that AI spits it out so your people aren't having to do the analysis, even in those dashboards and tools. It takes time. Use AI so they're making decisions and doing less of the analysis.
I've got one more question in the hopper that I'd love to ask, but I'm going to go ahead and move along and put contact information up in case people have to hop off, because I know we're not going to get to everything. But I did see a question pop up, and while I don't want to delve into housing policy because that's an entire different conversation, obviously with some of what the state is doing on ADUs and things like that, there's a question that came in that with the increase in ADU permitting and things like that, could TOT be seen as a way to increase revenue, thinking about short-term rentals, Airbnb, VRBO, type information. So any thoughts on that? I know that's kind of a big meaty question, but I just found it interesting because it ties together a lot of what agencies are facing right now.
We're actually seeing more ADUs being used for long-term rentals than short-term rentals right now.
Okay.
The short-term rental market, people, while they want an ADU, they sort of also want, just leave me alone and I don't want somebody looking at me the whole time. So that's why we see it at the long-term end a little bit more, and that's why a little bit pretty early on in the conversation I mentioned having a strong landlord a registration program is beneficial because you get that access. You know, hey, there's X number of ADUs. This is how much they're charging. Are they paying utilities? How many rooms do they have? And just that data that you need for other economic development or housing reasons to sort of build your community out or assess the needs of, hey, we need more ADUs, or we're not going to allow them as frequent or make them more difficult. So that's a great assessment, is having a program like that to you know, to really get the information, data, the analytics that you need.
Brad or Bobby, any thoughts on that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. The registration is the first step. And I think, again, that data, and if you're a big city, you know, how do you get a tool to come in and kind of spit out what you need to look at in that data and then make decisions from there? I think you hit the nail on the head.
So starting with, again, the assessment of your community, what the needs are, what your stock is, what some of that demographic information is that Connor was talking about. Perfect. All right. Well, as I skipped over on the last slide, a reminder that we will be sharing the recording as well as the materials from this webinar very shortly. So I want to thank everybody who jumped on and spent their lunch hour with us. And then please join me in thanking Connor and Brett and Bobby for their expertise and answering all of the questions on this afternoon's webinar. So Bobby, Connor, Brett, any final thoughts before we jump off?
Just a big thank you to ILG. Appreciate your time and everybody hopping on today.
Yep, me too. Thank you. Do your strategic planning for taxes, and I'll keep pushing that.
I did try to answer some of the questions that were in the chat, so feel free to go back and look there for a few answers. But yes, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, ILG, for the opportunity to speak with everybody today. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much and hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.